Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't want this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Special.
Basically, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Basically, I will give a short introduction who we are. Basically, our distinguished panelists, and we're very they are very learned and resourceful panelists. So I should introduce them about. So welcome. Already our president, Right to Freedom President Ambassador William B. Milam mentioned, but I want to introduce our Professor Dr. Ali Riaz, distinguished professor at the Department of Politics and Government at the Illinois State University, a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center, a great scholar. Dr. Riaz previously taught at university in Bangladesh, England, and South Carolina, USA, worked as a broadcast journalist at the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, in London, and served as a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center. Ali Riaz earned his PhD in political science from the University of Hawaii, and very recently he served as a visiting professor at the Institute of Democracy, University of Gothenburg. And he appeared before the US Congress in 2013 and 2015 as an expert witness. His primary area of interest, freedom of expression, democratization, freedom of expression, political Islam, South Asian politics, and Bangladesh politics. And he has written about more than 20 books in Bengali and English. And let me introduce Nurul Kabir. Is a Bangladeshi journalist, writer, columnist, editor, and activist. He's the editor of the outspoken Bangladeshi newspaper New Age and the editor of the Bengali weekly Budhbar. And Kabir received his Bachelor of Law from the University of Dhaka and Master of Arts, MA degree in English from the same university. He also studied advanced journalism at the Thomson Foundation in the UK and was awarded the Jefferson Fellowship for studying journalism at the East-West Center, the University of Hawaii. Because he's a very vocal and outspoken journalist, as we know, and because of his opposition to the military regime of Bangladesh and his defense of media freedom, Kabir has been attacked on several occasions. In 2007 and 2008, he had both his leg broken, was clashed gunmen on motorbikes. And he also a very good writer, and I can mention very recent book, Birth of Bangladesh, The Politics of History and the History of Politics. And our great, rights protector, I should say, Stephen Butler. Stephen Butler is a senior program consultant for CPJ. He previously served as CPJ Asia program coordinator, spent nearly 20 years in Asia studying and working as a foreign correspondent for the Financial Times, US News and World Report. He later returned to the United States, where he was foreign editor at the Knight Ridder newspaper group during the Afghan and Iraq wars. He holds a PhD from Columbia University in political science, where he focused in China. And our very good friend of mine and very good tested friend of Bangladesh, I should say, as we are discussing on Bangladesh, Ambassador William B. Milam. So, where is his? Okay, I got it. Yeah, so Ambassador Milam served as US Ambassador in Bangladesh and Pakistan, and he was the mission chief of Tripoli, Libya, and he's our president also. He's working as a senior scholar of the Wilson Center. He's an eminent writer and columnist, and now he is leading our group, A Right to Freedom, as president. And he's very famous in Bangladesh because when he served as ambassador at the time, General Ershad, falling down, and he was president of Bangladesh. And so he was eyewitness how the democracy back in Bangladesh in 1990, and he he earned his MA in economics from the University of Michigan. So our panel discussion, Ambassador Bill Milam will moderate our panel discussion. He will be the moderator. So, and then after the formal discussion, as he said, we'll go for the Q&A. So Ambassador Bill Milam, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mushfiq. That was very kind of you, particularly when you talked about me. But anyway, I want to get right into the meeting now because we may run out of time. I don't want to do that. So Stephen Butler is going to start off, as I mentioned earlier, and I think we'll turn to him right now and ask him to take the floor. No, you don't have to get up.
Okay.
You only have to sit ahead and talk into the microphone.
You can talk in the podium if you want.
Or if you'd rather go.
Talking is fine, I can talk.
Yeah, it's easier to sit up.
I've been following press freedom issues in Bangladesh for a number of years. And, but in preparation for this meeting, I went back to look at the recent history. And even though I was aware of incidents as they were happening, I was shocked. It has just deteriorated so significantly. Whereas, previous years, you would see the occasional incident. It just come one after the other. And I'd like to start by taking the discussion a little bit back to the basics. Why do we care about press freedom? Well, I'm a journalist. I have a lot of journalist friends. I care about them, care about the journalists. But press freedom is actually a critical part of the issue of freedom of expression. And the CPJ has recently begun to use a slightly different slogan about this, which is press freedom is your freedom. And what does that mean? It means that everyone has the basic right of access to information. And how do you get that information? It is only through an independent and free press. And independence is key, especially from the government. Without access to free information and independent sources, citizens cannot gain access to information that they need to participate in any sort of democratic process. Some people will say that press freedom is even more important and more fundamental than democracy itself. And this is true. It's true in the United States, where journalists and press freedom have also come under attack in recent years, and it's certainly true for Bangladesh. According to research by the Bangladeshi human rights organization, Aina Salish Kendra, in the first 4 months of this year alone, there have been 90 incidents of different kinds of harassment of journalists. That includes 21 cases of torture, harassment, and threats from law enforcement, 19 legal cases filed against published news. 13 of these attacks have been associated with the ruling Awami Party, Awami League, and 4 are associated with the BNP. This is a terrible record. In recent cases, the Digital Security Act has been used against the Protham Alo editor Majir Rehman and the journalist Samshizan Shams over an article that looked at the rising cost of living in Bangladesh. They are accused of tarnishing the image and reputation of the state. Frankly, the charge is absurd. Criticizing the state of society and government is precisely what journalists do and must be free to do. And it is not the business of government to stop them. Criticism of the government is a sign of a healthy press and democracy. It should be something to be proud of, that the governments can tolerate criticism, and not something to be suppressed. While these 2 men have been granted bail and are not being held in jail, very likely these cases will hang over them for years. Similarly, the authorities have gone after the award-winning Protham Alo health reporter, Rosina Islam, with a vengeance. She has been charged under the Colonial Era Official Secrets Act and has faced continuous harassment since her arrest 3 years ago. The case against her has continued despite a report by the detective branch of the Dhaka police recommending that it be dropped for lack of evidence. After seven months after that report came out, the health ministry issued a request back to the detective branch to reinvestigate the case. She must appear regularly in court and has lost her rights, surrendering her passport and the loss of her press credentials. Even the Prime Minister has weighed in, referring to the case with evident derision and simply ignoring the lack of evidence that Rosina Islam had been doing anything other than her job. Prothamala seems to have become a particular target of ire. The Prime Minister has called Prothamala the enemy of the ruling Awami Party, the democracy, and the people of the country. These kinds of remarks have real-world consequences, as a group of young people subsequently broke into the Prothamala offices and vandalized them. The basic tactic is intimidation. That's what we have seen in the case of our friend Shahidul Alam, who has spoken here before. I suspect the government is not really interested in putting him in jail again, because the last time they did that, the international outcry was huge. Instead, they have opted for a strategy of continuous harassment. He's been charged under a statute that no longer exists, yet he has to show up periodically in court, where basically nothing happens other than to renew his requirement that he appear again. Authorities have opened a DSA case into the UK-based journalist Abdul Rab Burrow, but the most alarming aspect of this kind of harassment is the arrest of his brother at home in Bangladesh. Similarly, the brother of the UK-based journalist Zulkarnain Ser Khan was attacked on the streets of Dhaka with iron rods by 4 unidentified men. These are not isolated cases, but part of a pattern of harassment of innocent family members of exiled journalists abroad. Other countries do this as well. China has done it. In fact, frankly, it's a kind of barbaric practice to hold family members responsible for what are not really even crimes of their relatives. Very recently, the law minister has said the Digital Security Act, responsible for the arrest of so many journalists, would be revised to prevent its misuse. I would like to believe this will happen, but I'm not optimistic. I was told when visiting Dhaka in December 2017 by the then Information Minister, Ahsanul Haque, that the Section 57 of the Information and Communication Act, the predecessor of the DSA, was being misused by local authorities to go after journalists. He told me that the revised bill would prevent that by creating a committee of senior journalists to vet cases against journalists before they could be arrested. He did not accept my argument that criminal defamation should be revoked. But aside from whether his idea was good, obviously it never happened. The DSA was passed in October 2018 without serious consultation with journalists, and it has been used indiscriminately since. It is extremely easy to invoke criminal defamation procedures under the law. Government officials repeatedly say that the law has been misused, but they don't do anything to stop it. Bangladesh used to be more of a democracy. It wasn't perfect, but there were elections. The BNP and the Awami League would exchange, places and control of the government. And over the years, there was a very lively and highly credible free press that grew with the Daily Star and the Prothamala. The strangling of both democracy and press has taken years. Bangladesh faces national elections in 2024, just 7 months from now. It will be a test to see if enough space remains for freedom of expression to allow a genuine competition between the two parties, given the fact that the newspaper reflected the views of the BNP was forcibly closed. This doesn't seem very likely at this point. And the events of the past few months do not leave me much ground for optimism.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was very good. I think, as I said earlier, that in fairness to you and to Steve, we'll give him a chance to answer questions that may arise in your minds. And then after he finishes answering those, he'll be free to leave when he wants. And we'll turn to Mr. Kabir, who's, I think, with us and still is with us in Dhaka, hopefully. In any case, may I ask if anybody has questions and would like to address them, one or more of them, to Steve? Here's a question right here.
Thank you, Steve. I have a question that's election commissioner already declared the next election in the polling area. Media cannot use their camera. They cannot go inside the polling room, and they cannot use the motorbike. How we expect the election will be free and fair, and the media can cover all of them?
Well, I think the government is obviously setting the stage for a kind of manipulated election that we saw the last time around. I think it was widely understood that there were irregularities in the election previously. And these kinds of restrictions, I mean, obviously you want to allow for some privacy for the voters. But beyond that, this is really extraordinary. The press should be free to observe the process, including the process of counting and the handling of the ballots. So this is not a good sign.
I forgot to tell you that Steve is the master of understatement too. Are there other questions that you would like to ask? John, my friend John.
Thank you for your introduction. It's I think useful to kind of put this in a greater context as well, kind of just the importance of press freedom in general. You'd mentioned consultations with the government a couple of years ago, kind of in the run-up to the DSA, and kind of the vision that, I don't know if it was the vision anyone had or if it was just something being told to you to make you smile and leave. But kind of as talk about reforming the DSA has kind of stepped up in recent months, or weeks even, kind of in government-affiliated publications are increasingly kind of signaling that some sort of change might be coming. What do you think are good signposts to see if the changes are meaningful or window dressing? Do you have a vision kind of on if the DSA is going to be retained in some capacity, what are the parts that, if they were excised, would be a more reasonable legislation?
To make it reasonable, I mean, this is something that CPJ campaigns on all over the world. DSA is a fundamentally, it's a criminal defamation statute, and criminal defamation is wrong. We have no objection to civil defamation when there are actual, losses that are experienced because of this defamation. So the first marker is, are they going to retain criminal defamation? And I hope that they decide that that's not a good path to go down. Once you have criminal defamation, journalists are very much at risk. I suppose it would be better if there were a more careful vetting process for allegations that are made under the law. I mean, that would be better than what's there. This idea of having an outside, experts, if you like, vet allegations might soften some aspects of the law. But my favorite, my favorite. This is actually pre-DSA. Was that it's very interesting because you can publish something in a print form, and it doesn't come under the rubric of the law. But once it goes online, then it's subject to. There was this story a few years ago. It's actually rather humorous that there was a newspaper article about the fact that a representative, an elected representative, had given goats to his constituents, and the goats died. A number of the goats died, and so this was actually, it was a newspaper article said this, and when it went online, they arrested the guy who wrote the article for defamation. I mean, that's a ridiculous case, but what we're actually seeing is not necessarily less ridiculous. I mean, look at these cases against Prothomalo. Look at the fact that, Rosina Islam is not under the DSA, that's a different kind of case, but it's plain that You know, there's an expression in Chinese about, you know, you kill the chicken to scare the monkey. Basically, if you put one person in jail, then you scare everybody. And, you know, in my visit, you know, when I've met the editors of these papers, they say they are very frightened. You know, if you look at Guatemala, it was founded in 1992. It's by Major Renman, and he's frightened not just for himself, but for his staff. And so you don't need too many arrests, you know, to make the point that everyone is in danger. I don't know if how that answers your question, but I think the fundamental question is there should not be criminal defamation, you know, for this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Any other questions? Ghulam, I kind of thought you would ask a question, sitting back there.
Thank you. Yeah, Ghulam Surawardi from South Asia. I like your comment on the status of press or press freedom in the world's largest democracy, or the biggest democracy, actually, India, and especially in terms of their coverage of Bangladesh. I find a lot of their coverage, which is of course pro-Indian, but then again it also does not cover the problems in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Well, under the Modi government, I think it's fair to say that there has been a gradual and ultimately severe taming of the national press, the television stations and the printed newspapers. It's very difficult to operate a business in India if you go against the government, you know, for a lot of different reasons. There still is some, you know, you have Caravan, you know, and some of the online sites are still rather independent, but their impact is fairly limited, I think. And of course, we've seen a complete gutting of the press in Kashmir. I don't read the Indian press on Bangladesh, so I'm not able to comment on that, you know, too terribly much. But it's very clear that you cannot operate a successful business as a newspaper or a TV station in India if you seriously cross the government. So I think that's, you know, what it amounts to. The skills are there, the will is there, but they just don't have the ability at this point.
Thank you.
Again, thanks. Are there any other questions? Silence. Well, before I let Steve go, because that would be a mistake to let him go early, he'll never come back. Huh?
Just stay for a bit, sir.
I know you will, yeah. But I would, as a chairman, I'd like to use the prerogative that chairmen usually have to ask a question myself. Maybe it's more of a statement, but in any case, Steve, going back to one of your other answers, I was thinking about the question of defamation and the fact that when you, and you said it, I think, but I wanted to make clear that, be clear if I understood it, but I think that when defamation has a criminal result, when somebody sues you for defamation and you go to jail in case they lose, then that is something that will cast fear throughout the journalistic profession, I would think. It's a way of silencing journalists who are, you know, eager to ask questions about some policy or some event that they think was not probably reflecting countries that claim to be democracies. Would you not agree with that?
I agree 100%. I mean, you scare everybody and they fall into line all by themselves.
And this is a kind of just another way, because it seems to me that Bangladesh uses the courts and the law as hammers to silence criticism across the board, because there are, you know, these newspaper editors are then pulled in, then have cases filed against them, which have nothing to do with defamation necessarily, but are requiring them to spend days, months, and years going from court to court defending themselves sometimes. Is that not true too?
Yes, some of the senior editors have multiple cases filed all around the country, and it's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and you know, they persist. But it's the level of harassment is really horrific, and frankly it's a tragedy that there's tremendous talent there's tremendous talent and courage amongst many Bangladesh journalists, and I feel the same way about Pakistan, and I feel the same way about India. There's tremendous potential. These are national resources that are being stifled.
Yes, thank you for those answers. They were more statements than questions, I admit, but in any case, they clarified things in my mind at least. And I was going to say that speaking of India, some of the people who have been run afoul of the Indian government with regard to their journalistic activities would call, you mentioned if the change had been gradual by the Modi government. I think many people would say it was a little bit more than gradual, but you know, I'm just nitpicking in a sense. In any case, I've run out of questions, and Steve, I know, has not run out of answers. So if anybody else wants to ask a question, do it now. Going once, going twice, gone. Okay, Steve, you're off the hook. But you can stay, stay as long as you want. Stay forever if you want. I mean, I like sitting next to you. Now, I think we're going to ask Nurul Kabir to give us his take on the challenges in Bangladesh, because I think it's time for you to talk. And speaking from Dhaka, I'm hoping that the transmission works. Doesn't always, you know, but we've had good luck with you so far. So, Nurul, start now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, respected panelists. Good afternoon for you. Well, as I was listening to the previous speaker, let me inform you that I missed for a minute or so because of serious load shedding here. Already we have been hearing about a lot of developments, particularly in the power sector, but Bangladesh has these days is experiencing serious load shedding. So I missed a little that I've been able to be connected. So as I've already heard that some facts have already been stated, I will be rather talking about the political and legal aspects of the law that Bangladesh media and the people in Germany are confronted with. That the Digital Security Act has become a serious problem, and there's a serious atmosphere of intimidation and is there pervasive fear. That's there. But to talk about the democratic freedom of press and the freedom of expression of our people, we have more than 2 dozens of laws. Most of them were enacted in the colonial period, first in the British era, and then in the Pakistan era. We have our successive governments, and we have talked about media freedom and democracy a lot of time, and we talk about this every day. But fact remains that there are more than 2 dozens of laws. They are still confronting us, and no government has taken the trouble to even review those, despite our repeated requests, appeal, and demands. That's one. And the nature of the press freedom, and particularly the obstacles towards press freedom, are not only just legal, it's political, financial, partisan and administrative. Say, at the moment we have the whole world knows, perhaps at least the thinking sections of the people, informed sections of people across the world knows that we have a very authoritative government in place. And almost, practically almost a one-party regime is here. So nowhere on earth, I believe, an authoritarian government can rule with plurality of opinions prevailing in society. So they lead to silence the political opponents on the one hand, and the individual critics, and as well as the democracy-loving sections of the press. So the kind of law that we have is very much consistent with the kind of governance that we have in this country. Another dimension of the nature of this law is not just the free flow of information of the day-to-day governance. History research has become a serious problem in this country because the law clearly stands in the way of objective research. For example, digital security, one of the provisions of the Digital Security Act says that you cannot be critical of the narratives of Bangladesh's liberation war that took place 51 years ago. Now, every war, every liberation movement across the world, across the ages, have different narratives. Now, the Bangladesh government has a particular official narrative. If you cannot context, you just cannot challenge, or you cannot even go for using narratives or analysis that is not consistent with that of the government. Or you can do it, of course, you cannot do it without defying the law. And if you defy the law, if you defy the government, you may face implications. And beside the law, the financial arm twisting remains a serious problem for the media industry here. This happens on two grounds. One is many newspapers are dependent on the government advertisement in this country. And even if some papers are not dependent on them, if they want to run it independently, based on private sector advertisement revenue, they have no respite as well, because there are reports that different agencies, government leaders, the ruling party leaders, pro-ruling party businessmen, they just tell others or take the course for themselves not to support any newspaper by way of giving advertisement. If they do, they face problems from the government. So this financial arm twisting remains a serious problem as well, side by side with the laws. And you have this partisan administration set up over the last 14 or 15 years now, and you have at the same time from the center to the periphery of the country, the unruly political activists belonging to the ruling party and coalition, that they will create different problems and intimidate the local journalists. Most of them are not reported in the national and international media. So we have our problem of free flow of information. We have our problem of history research. We have our problem of political class as such in power and outside the power, that both the camps refuse to address the freedom of expression issue from the broader democratic point of view. We do talk about piece by piece laws, but I don't think that this is the real solution, because we have seen in the past every government has promised us that they will be repealing or scrapping the intimidating laws inconsistent with the democratic dispensation political system, but end of the day, I believe it remains the problem of social and political democratization of the whole world and society, whole state and the society. And for that to happen, this movement for protest and particularly the protest against the TSA, the Digital Security Act, and other laws are related to the greater political movement for democracy. So, piecemeal wise, we are registering some protests. In the international community, so people like you and others have sympathized with us, but it remains a serious problem, a comprehensive problem of democratization of the society and state. I think I would stop here for the time being. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nurul. That was very good. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to go to Ali, and then we'll ask you to stay for questions, because we'll do the questions of both of you after Ali speaks, if that's okay with you. So, thank you very much. Ali, it's your turn.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mushfiq, for having me. I originally thought of having a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm going to ditch it and talk about, because some of the facts that I was planning to has been presented already. But in order to understand the challenges of freedom of expression in Bangladesh, we need to start with the current situation, particularly the paradox that is. I call it paradox because often you'll hear it from the government, especially the ministers, particularly the information minister and others. I understand foreign minister, Mr. Momin also mentioned on other occasions, is the number of media in Bangladesh. They're absolutely correct that there is a proliferation of media. Then I can give you the number, even if the government is not putting those out. In 2006, for example, when right before this current government came into power, that is, this government came into power in 2009, in 2006 was the last political government that we saw, meaning that 2007 and 8 was a caretaker regime supported by the military. In 2006, there were 601 newspapers in Bangladesh, according to the government statistics. In 2022, that is last year, there are 3,187 newspapers, weeklies and dailies that we are talking. So you can say there is a proliferation, definitely, number says that. Television channels. In 2006, there were only 8 television, private channels that we are talking about. The state-owned channels have been has always been the case that it has supported the government. So the private channels, television channels that we're talking about have been only 8. Now there are at least 33 channels that are operating. So what do we see? There are a lot of media. But if you look at the situation, particularly the Reporter with the Reporter's numbers, that what are the situation in Bangladesh. The last one that we have, that is 2023, the Bangladesh's total point out of 100 is 35.31. It is close to 126th position or something like that. But most importantly, what we have seen is the, erosion. In a single year, Bangladesh actually reached 10 spots last year. I'm talking about between 2021 and 22. How was the situation before? If we look at, say, for example, 2012, that is about a decade ago, even under this present government, Bangladesh's score was 57.99, significantly high. So over the years, in less than a decade, on the one hand, we have seen the proliferation of the media, but we have also seen the erosion, severe erosion, insofar as the freedom of media is concerned. Having a lot of bad apples doesn't actually help you, does it? Having a good apple is fine, but having too many bad apples doesn't tell you that it's going to help your health, right? Having an apple every day keeps the doctors away, but not on bad apples, it doesn't. What is the bigger picture actually, why it is happening? It is happening, as Nurul Kabir has rightly pointed out, because of the political situation. And if you look at the civil liberties and the political rights that we have seen, from various indicators. Take, for example, the Freedom House indicators with respect to the political rights, In 2010, right after this government came into power, a year after that, the total score with respect to the political right was 26 out of 40. Now it is 15. You can see how it has degraded. Civil liberties in 2010 was 34. Last year, this 2023 score is 50. So when we are looking at the dwindling situation with respect to the press freedom, it is not separated from the political and civil rights that we are witnessing. So it is not only about how the media is doing, how many media do you have, those sort of things. It is whether there is an environment within which the media is operating. And that is not good. That is absolutely not good. If you look at the overall democracy score that Freedom House has put out, in 2009 it was 56. In 2022, it is 39. As a matter of fact, in 2010, 2011, we have seen the score was close to 60. So what happened between this? Two elections happened actually. 2014 election. What happened in between? Of course, we have mentioned Digital Security Act happened, and its predecessor, ICT Act happened. First of all, already the DSA is there, but despite the fact that UN Human Rights Chief has asked for suspending, government has said that it is not going to. They may actually have a window dressing kind of, some amendments to it. But whenever there is an amendment, I get scared because ICT Act was amended, so to speak, in 2013. And then when they talked about amending ICT, it ended up with a far more draconian Digital Security Act. And the Prime Minister has clearly said that they are not going to revoke, they are not going to suspend the Digital Security Act. So it would be used. It will be used against the journalists and the political activists. We have seen that one in 2013, right before the election. We have seen that one in 2018, right before the election. There is an election coming. And there are two other new laws, at least two, the Data Protection Act, DPA. That is going to be a problem. Then we have this digital social media OTT platform legislation, which will provide enormous restraint and constraints on the media. Then there is another one. They're trying to amend the Press Council Act of 1974. What happened? Amendments with punitive measures. Interesting part is this, that the Press Council Act is being amended, but nobody actually knows what is being amended. The Editors' Council, which Nurul Kabir is a member, if I'm wrong, please correct me to my understanding, they have not been consulted on this. With the election, with these new laws, with the situation, not only with respect to the media, overall situation is going to be very difficult. Not only difficult, let me put it this way bluntly, that whatever the little space is left, how long that little space would remain depends on not only on the media, it depends on the political situation. If the authoritarian, or I would say autocratic tendency of this government continues, and if they can succeed in having another 2014 or 2018 kind of election, I don't see any possibility of having any kind of press freedom that can challenge the system of governance. So let's talk about the system of governance. And without that, I don't think we'll go anywhere. With that, let me finish. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was quite a lot to digest, but it was very interesting and very, very, I thought, insightful. Not speaking into the microphone, as you're telling me. Well, it's because my hands are so gripped out here. Anyway, it's time for questions. And don't forget Nurul Kabir up here, because he had said some pretty interesting things too. So how many questions are there? Can I ask for questions for both, to both guys? I don't see hands going up a lot. Oh, well, there's, let's take him first, John. Okay.
Thank you for nice arrangement, and I'd love to thank Dr. Olivier. It's a really wonderful thoughts and ideas and lots of data. I have a question to you, at the same time I have a question to Mr. Nurul Kabir. If we have any pain, we go to the doctor, and we always express the level of pain, that personal level of pain, out of 10. If I say that my pain is 10 out of 10, so they will prescribe me accordingly. But we know that what is our pain in Bangladesh. And if it is a 10 out of 10, what will be the prescription? That is a question number one. And number two, that we always believe that freedom is not free. But civil society are raising lots of points, criticizing. That's okay. But if you don't care any criticism, if you don't think that whatever it is, I don't mind, I don't care. So what will be happen? Because criticizing, we are every day criticizing in the talk show, news media, international community, civil society, journalists. But if anybody don't care, what will be the happen? I know it is not very easy to reply that what will be the happen. But always believe that if you have a choice, choose the best. Or if you have a no choice, do the best. So, you know, I'm a civil rights activist, and I came from Bangladesh. I'm a self-exiled here, and I know the pain. But I don't know what will be the solution. And Dr. Ali Riyad, he described lots of things. And Nurul Kabir, he's fighting over there every day. But my question to Dr. Nurul Kabir, do you think that you are alone, or you are, because lots of journalists, they have their own narratives. The government, like you described, you mentioned earlier that government has their own narratives in Bangladesh in liberation, about the liberation. At the same time, government has their own narratives about the democracy. So what do you think? And at the same time, sir, I have a question to you, that revolution is necessary or any other agenda we can, but what will be the suffice for this? Thank you so much.
Nurul Kabir, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I would love to. In the first place, I'm not alone. That's just quite a great piece of respect that asking you the question that whether I'm alone. I'm not. Millions of people are behind us who are for the spirit of democracy and freedom. But revolution doesn't come every year. Even the mass of choices also doesn't come every year. as I always find it, basically is a political problem. So until and unless these issues of media freedom are related to the problem of democracy, we are not going to have any solution. That's number one. Number two, that the gentleman has talked about that every day government criticism is there on the television. I humbly disagree. Now, looking into the issues of political governance, political system critically, and just making some commands against the government are not the same thing. There's another major problem that we have in this society today is we have a very half-educated, I'm sorry for the language, it's a very half-educated ruling elite. If you look at the law that we have been talking about, the TSA, you will see that even the lawmakers have been confused about the differences between the state, government, the party, ruling party, and others. Because there's a section of the law that says, even someone tarnishes the image of a state by his or her writing or providing any content in the internet system, he or she will be accused of subversive of state cases. But under this law, many cases have been lost because of criticizing the Prime Minister or a minister, or say an MP or a ruling party leader. They have been implicated under this law against of the allegations of subversive of state activities. Now, if a ruling elite, political elite, intellectual elite, cannot even distinguish between the state and the government and the democratic right of the people to even criticize the elected government, even if it's elected properly, it can only remind us of the thing that Louis XIV said that I am the state. So there's a serious problem of even political understanding of the laws among the ruling elite, in and outside the power. So until and unless those who are fighting for democracy and freedom of press and freedom of expression of the people in general can seriously address the issues critically from different perspectives, political, economic, philosophical, and cultural, we won't have a solution. You were talking about, say, I'm sorry if I'm taking intimidation. I personally don't like of talking about my own self, but the family. When my younger son was
recording in progress.
Yes.
Is this okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. We hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
So when my younger son was a 12th grader, my wife started receiving calls from unknown callers that if her husband, that's my own self, don't stop writing and talk critically. Her younger son was a teenager, was a victim many times. And then I went to the police station, registered a channel diary, requested them to look into the issue. Now, but no investigation, nothing. So I was forced to send my poor journalist. I was forced to mobilize my resources and send him abroad. The question is, this case still remains pending. Forget about several years ago that my car was sorted. Once again, I registered a channel diary. But no investigation has been conducted so far. No police people told me anything. This is my case. I know there are many such cases. So some people are individually fighting against those, getting victims, but still there's no greatness about it. That for me, it's a professional adjunct. My family is the victim, but that will not solve the problem. Eventually, it's a political problem. Eventually, it has to be registered in politically until and unless people are mobilized for the freedom of expression. So I would request the questioner to understand one thing and communicate it to others. Freedom of the press is more important for the people in general than the journalists themselves. Because until and unless people can have free flow of information conducted by the journalists, people cannot make informed opinion to judge the governance of a political party in power, no matter who is in power. So, the professional interest of the journalist and democratic interest of the people at large has to come together to make sure that people have the right to expression, that media have the right to freedom of expression. Thank you.
Thank you, that's a very powerful response. Ali, do you want to add to that?
I would just briefly add to that, what is the next step then? I mean, to me, it is incremental. Definitely, without a complete overhauling of this political system, there might not be a true sense of the term. There could be freedom of expression, but at this point, to me, it is more important to have the right to speak as much possible, right of assembly, and those are so restricted, and with an election coming, the immediate point is this inclusiveness of the system. There is need to be pressure on the current government. That is most important to me. You talk of revolution, I am talking about the basic rights. We have, unfortunately, possibly, Bangladesh has moved back so much that at this point, the fundamental rights needs to be restored and restored. It cannot be simply restored by the journalist. It is not the journalist's responsibility. It's the political process, the act of the politician, and most importantly, of the people. I hope that is what people are understanding. The political force needs to understand that the challenge is far greater, not only with respect to freedom of expression, but overall the future of the country actually depends. And that's why I think it is very important. 2023 might have become the most consequential year of Bangladeshi politics.
Thank you, Ali. John, I haven't forgotten you. So go ahead.
Thank you. Is this working? Yeah. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to take another swipe at the.
Can everybody hear you?
Or is it not on? Ah, it was not on. Wasn't on.
Oh.
Perfect. Is it on now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
better.
perfect.
Yeah.
So thank you for giving me another chance to swipe at the panel. Dr. Riaz, you mentioned kind of this incremental, partly incremental, but that there was a market uptick kind of in the intensity of restrictions on freedom of expression ahead of elections, right? You'd kind of particularly notified, 2013, 2014, and then, 2017, 2018, around those elections, things got worse. Obviously, with an election coming up, and things look like they're getting pretty bad at the moment, markedly worse than they were even 5-10 years ago. I'm wondering, and this may be a naive question, and this is to both panelists. After the upcoming elections, kind of presuming that they go the way that they look like they're going to go, which is that the Awami League is somehow going to massively win as the most popular government in Bangladesh's history, is there a chance that the situation will improve, or is this more of a ratcheting and then things stay at that new normal, right? Will things stop deteriorating further after the election and just stay bad? Or will the government continue to feel so insecure that it will need to continue to put the screws on journalists? And kind of, if things are going to get better, is there really anything that could force the government to do that indigenously, or is that kind of going to have to come from external pressure?
either one of you can answer.
No, definitely I would like to hear from Nurgul, but let me put my 2.5 cents to it. First of all, John, you are assuming, right, possibly, based on the trajectory that things would go as it is expected by the government, and there would be another election akin to, if not exactly the same, of 2014 and 18. Let me remind us, you and me, both, history is not given actually, the trajectory is not given. Imagine, things happen differently. History is made, and history is made by the people. So we shouldn't be just taking it for granted that this is how it is going to go. Likelihood of it is, as of now, perhaps is great. So the second thing that you alluded to or mentioned, that whether it would get, a new normal things. If the political situation is where you see, or where it is likely, or where it is, anticipated to be, situation would get worse because the political situation would get worse. This is the point that I've tried to make by referring to the civil liberties score, the political rights score. These are going to go down, definitely go down. And here, going out of the limb, not related entirely, or talking about the press freedom in the sense, but it is related in this larger sense that increasingly a de facto one-party system is emerging. It has already emerged within the parliament. Now it is going to be like this if there is an election. Always, I think it is Cambodia can be an example where you can see how where does it go, but then again, history is not given. No, there is no defined pathway, no trajectory. Today is the final one.
Mr. Kabir, now you have a turn to respond to John.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would rather start with Dr. Elias' last thing, that history is not given. Let me be frank about one thing. Once our chair of the seminar today was in Bangladesh as ambassador. However, those days I was a university student, and I was a left-wing political activist. I almost every day I used to chant slogan on the university campus and in the street. Perhaps Dr. Alias will bear me out, and it was not a very serious exception, if I can remember, that down with American imperialism. And the history has come to full circle. Now, is the same person on the same session in search of a political dispensation. Both of us are talking about democracy in Bangladesh. So history is not given, it changes. I find myself as a friend today in the given political, geopolitical circumstances. The introduction to the response. As the question was whether we can indigenously solve this problem or external efforts will be there. Since in these days of globalization, all of us live in a community of states. That every state has their own interest in every other states. And the movement for democracy in these states cannot be successful without fighting it both at the national and international level. Those who have stood in the way of our democratic rights have their international friends as well. So those who are the victims of authoritarian rule must have their friends at the international level as well. The solidarity of the democratic forces across the world is important. So I believe that Bangladesh's problem, which primarily remains the problem of the Bangladeshis, and that to fight primarily for their own, at the same time democratically oriented sections of the people across the world need to support us. It's the solidarity for democracy locally and internationally is important. So my response is, of course, people of Bangladesh have to fight for their democratic rights. At the same time, those who believe in the concept of democratic compensation across the world, beyond the border of Bangladesh, have also support us for this government. And the election issue that has come forward here, well, as my 30 years of journalistic experience, and few years of political activism in my youth, and some sense of history, dictates me to tell you that if there is a free and fair election tomorrow, the incumbents will go, definitely go. But the challenge remains whether we the people of Bangladesh, can wrestle out an atmosphere that will enable us, our people, to freely choose their representatives. That's one. And the second important question remains, well, even if we succeed in this country, the people, I'm not just a journalist, but at the same time I'm a citizen too. So we the people can change this regime. What happens next? The political opposition parties have assured the journalists separately that they will do away with this law. But since some of us who believe in the weighing of some particular laws will not, in fact, ensure democratic freedom of the press, and those who believe that the political parties waiting for power or the next regime will ensure democracy at the social, political, even at their party level, until and unless the forces fighting for democracy are not democratic enough. So we have to face the same problem, even if there is a regime change. So once again, our friends across the world needs to support us in support by way of supporting the view that the political parties, be it in power or be it outside the power, those who are vying for political power needs to be democratic first. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very good. I had it in my mind that the meeting would end around 3 o'clock. It's getting close to 3 o'clock, but I'm willing to entertain more questions if there are any. And I see 2 hands have gone up. I'm going to call on Ghulam first.
Once again, Ghulam Surawardi here, and I don't want to forecast, but I see the precedents. In 1974, Bangladesh was going towards an autocratic and authoritarian government under the Baksha, which everybody knows what it is. And I kind of see there is a transposition of that today. Because every authoritarian indicators lead to that, in my opinion. Now again, I'm not a political commentator or philosopher, the reason being that, and then she's being supported, she means our Prime Minister, is being supported by India for one reason, China for another reason, and Russia right behind it. I just like to have the comment from both Professor Ali Riaz as well as Mr. Nur Kabir Khan, whether I am really dreaming or something that that's going to happen, that all these movements we're talking about, democratic movement, there's no democracy, how can you have a movement? So there is actually, we have a ship without a captain. So please, I just leave it at that.
Interesting question. I'll get to you in a minute. I'd like to hear answers to that. Ali, I think it's your turn to answer first, or go ahead. Nurul, would you like to comment on that first?
This time Riaz should come up with the...
Let me put it this way. All the indications of the of the 1974, meaning that a de facto one-party system. What I mentioned previously, in case of 1975, it was the legally, constitutionally de jure one-party system. But what I see now is practically a de facto one-party system has emerged, and it would be consolidated, so to speak, if the next election goes as it is anticipated. With respect to the support, and that brings John's question as well, which I didn't respond to previously, that this is the alignment that we are witnessing currently is this, as you mentioned, the India, China, and Russia aligning with the government because they have reasons and vested interest in this. And this is a political question. It is, some of the people try to tell us that it is the economic part of it, the China connection is nothing but the money connection for the infrastructure development. I don't think so. I say it's an ideological affinity that we see. India has its own interest. China has its own interest. China's desire, the aggressive policy that it is pursuing, trying to have its expanded sphere of influence. India wants to see, and I think that India has always pursued a kind of Monroe doctrine that Bangladesh should be expected. And having a successful Bangladesh is not exactly very good for India, is it? You know. So with those kind of things, this alignment would continue. But that brings to the question of John, that whether the external forces have any role to play. The Bangladesh's loss of democracy is not entirely because of the domestic politics of Bangladesh. Bangladesh's democratic backsliding has been supported by external forces, and in some cases, it gives me pain to say, but it is the fact of life that the Western countries have not done their role as they should have done while it was, sliding towards autocracy. India has a pivotal role in that. So if the Bangladesh democracy goes down with the support of the international community, however you put it, shouldn't they play a role in reversing the course?
Thank you. Nurul, did you want to add anything, or I didn't hear what you said?
Completely agree with Dr. Riaz. I will just add something to make it more clear for the gentleman who has raised this question. Because in fact we have shifted our discussion to now geopolitics. Well, if you have noticed the development in Bangladesh, particularly at the diplomatic level, a few years ago, a few hours, Bangladesh government enforced the decision that the government rhetorically said because of the austerity problem, the additional protocol of some states, in the United States, UK, and others have been withdrawn for their resolution. And CSA, our Prime Minister has clearly stated publicly that Bangladesh will not buy anything from any country that imposes sanction on Bangladesh. And she clearly met at this point of history, the United States. So question remains that we will follow in the days to come. As far as I understand, Washington has that North Pole.
Well, we've lost him.
Yeah. Yep.
I wish I knew what he was going to say next.
You can relate. Probably Washington does not want to.
Maybe.
Wow.
I don't want to talk unless if he starts talking again. But
No.
I know he didn't just fall asleep.
While we wait for, I guess Mushfiq is trying to get to him.
Okay.
With respect to this, the situation that Nurul was referring to. Increasingly, this is the part of this geopolitical contestation in South Asia and beyond in Asia and Pacific. So there is a choice to be made, and increasingly it appears to me that Bangladesh is making a choice. The current regime seems to be making a choice that they would rather be aligned with these regimes which are much more authoritarian, and the aspirations of democracy is not on the carpet. That is the choice. It is not only a domestic one, even in the larger geopolitics, that is the choice it is making. Now the question is how those who claims to be the standard bearer of democracy, how they react to it. Will they just take it as it is in the name of engagement, or will they have any follow-up to what their ideologically suggesting? So that is the question that is increasingly coming at the forefront, and it will continue. And that is why, again, let me reiterate, which might have escaped your attention because I spoke it very mildly and slowly. 2023 can become, and likely to become, very consequential year for Bangladeshi politics, both domestically and its alignment in the global geopolitical scene. That is what I think. And there are indications domestically, and the one that you mentioned with respect to domestic politics, with respect to the geopolitical situation.
We can go for next question, please.
I guess we're not going to see Nurul again for a while, if ever this afternoon. I was going to say, I know we have another question, and so, but I'm going to just try and answer, or at least give my perspective on your question, Gulu. You started with talking about the Boxall, what happened, and whether history would, and whether with India working one way and China having another possibly, another thing, although this was 1975, China wasn't very active in those days politically. But I would think that China and India's relations with Bangladesh are now more or less alike. Both of them seem to favor the way things are going now and the move towards authoritarianism. I'm surprised that that's true with the Indians, but it seems to be more true because they don't seem to be very interested in Bangladesh stopping the direction it's going in. But more than that, let me say that my impression is that you wondered if a country which is pretty much totally authoritarian now, in my view, that's Bangladesh, is likely to start unwinding after an election. And if the election comes out like we think it's going to, which would be very favorable to the government, I don't see any evidence that in anything in history where a country which has gone the way Bangladesh is going starts to unwind without a serious revolution, without a serious transformation, and which neither India or China would be interested in supporting. I don't know if I even understood your question, but that's my response. So let me proceed with, Nurul is not with us yet. You had a question, and yes. I think this will be the last question, and unless anybody really wants to ask. Oh, this guy has a question. Thank you.
It's working, right?
It's working, I think.
Thank you. My question to Dr. Ali is, what I learned from this discussion panel, so Nurul Kabir and Dr. Ali Riaz and Stephen and from 180 million people from Bangladesh, the one person is suffering from fever, and at the same time he's suffering from cancer. So what we should take care first? If it's cancer, let's together we clean up the cancer first, and then we treat for fever. So what do you think?
Oh, I'll take your question at the same time. I'll take your question at the same time. We'll get two questions and see if that does it for the day.
She has one too. You do, right? Yeah.
I did, but if we need a round of
Oh,
applause.
well, I'll never turn a lady down. You actually come after this gentleman.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a question about the role of judiciary in freedom of press and freedom of expression. In case of Bangladesh, I think it is very much missing so far we have seen. And in any other developing countries, the role of judiciary is very important and very vital. And what could we do? What could be done to see these things? I mean, the role of judiciary coming into a point of freedom of expression.
That's, well, I'm not gonna try to answer that question, so anyway.
Sure, thank you. My question is for Professor Riaz. You were mentioning there are several amendments that are being drafted, discussed in Parliament with a lack of transparency. Where's the motivation for amending those coming from? Is it international pressure? Because we've seen in some other countries that international pressure to make these laws more free and fair. A lot of governments will take into account those considerations to get maybe more favorable trade preferences. Is that what's happening in Bangladesh right now? Or is the motivation to amend those laws internally and to clamp down on the media sector?
There are two laws that are being discussed of having some amendment. One is the Press Council Act, which is making it more punitive, so that there is no way to think that it is to just, satisfy or appease. That's not the one. Similarly, the understanding in the recent days has been that there could be some amendment to the Digital Security Act. This has come because of the external pressure, but also a whitewash, basically, lip service that they wanted to, so that we keep on talking about the amendments rather than actually what happened. Because I, one of them who have been following DSA, and I've always insisted on this point, that DSA by definition is supposed to be used like this. There is no abuse of DSA. DSA is used the way it has been meant to be and has succeeded at creating a culture of fear in the country, period. So there is no incentive whatsoever other than whitewash. Two other things that are being discussed or on the table, on the agenda, is the Data Protection Act, which is detrimental to the business interest, period. There is further, especially when Bangladesh intends to draw FDI, foreign direct investment. This is not the way to go. The last one is the OTT and the internet control. This is precisely, I would say that to make its grip more tightened, so that there's so far I haven't seen anything other than an effort of whitewash to ease anything whatsoever. So that's my understanding of the situation, and things would get worse after the election. With respect to the judiciary, right? First of all, talking about judiciary in Bangladesh is very perilous, because contempt of court can be brought against anybody at any point. Bangladeshi judiciary has not lived up to it, up to not only expectation, but I think it could and should have played. But then again, when there is an executive aggrandizement that we have seen, the level of executive aggrandizement, power concentrating on the single office, single hand, single institution, likelihood of having a judiciary playing any kind of role that is challenging this is unlikely until and unless the political situation changes. Pakistani judiciary, at least in recent years, have played differently. But then again, there are other instances they didn't, and also in some cases of Indian judiciary seems to stand up, in some cases they're not. But so far we haven't seen any kind of situation in Bangladeshi judiciary. But then again, this is the only country in this entire South Asia where the Chief Justice had to fled the country and claim that he has been driven out. That is the only, that tells us part of the story, if not the full. Okay. With respect to the last question that you asked, lost train of my thoughts. What was the question that you were asking? Oh, right. I mean, analogy, I'm always very skeptical about analogy because the analogies are very difficult to get into this. But the point is, what is to be done first? That is, I understood that what is to be done first. With respect to the Bangladesh democracy, I have a plain and simple thing. Understandably, there are problems. Bangladeshi democracy has never been foolproof. It has not been error-free or so. Even when there were two parties and coming an alternatively to power. But at this moment, had I been talking in 2006, I would have said, my answer would have been completely different. Please note. Today, in 2023, the central point is to have a free, fair, inclusive election. Period. That is the beginning. You cannot escape that one. Definitely democratization of political parties are necessary. Definitely the role of judiciary needs to be looked into. Definitely the constitution needs to be looked into. How the constitution has allowed the power concentration in a single hand, excuse me, needs to be, all these things needs to be looked into. But all this conversation can take place within a room which has a door called free, fair, inclusive election that allows everyone to participate and their voices are heard. Without that, nothing is going to happen. And that without an administration that can ensure that elections would be held free and fairly, that everyone's votes would be counted, everyone would be able to go to the vote center, polling center and cast their vote. And it's not only election day, leading to the election. Election has already started in Bangladesh. The process has started in Bangladesh. Election is not a matter of a day. Election is a process where political parties and the media and everything plays its part. So that, until that happens, all other things, despite this emergency, despite the fact that those are important, I don't think anyone can reach to that. The door is election, election, and election.
Well, are there any other questions? That's the first question I have. And the answer to that looks to be no. And that's pretty good because on the note that Ali Riaz just made, we can adjourn the election and go out and commit suicide. No. I mean, we can go out and be pessimistic. And that certainly it was not the most uplifting way to end the meeting, but it's a good way because it's an honest way. So anyway, unless there's any other business or anything else anybody wants to say, I think it's past 3 and I know it's time to end the meeting. Yes, John?
When's the next Right to Freedom event?
Next Right to Freedom what?
Event.
Next event, maybe in July.
No, we're not gonna do it in July. I don't think we're gonna, I'm not gonna be here, but I think they ought to do it in June, towards the end of June. But we don't know yet, because we haven't decided. And so I'll just leave that question unanswered, and you will know when we do it. Believe me, we count on your presence at the next event, whenever it is. And the rest of you too, all of you. We enjoyed having you. It's been one of the better meetings I've been at in a long time. I've enjoyed it. 3 very good speakers, lots of good questions. and lots of kind of disappointingly pessimistic answers, but after all, truth is truth, isn't it?
He get in, Nurul Kavi is here.
Nurul, are you back?
Yeah, we can hear from him.
We can hear you. Yes, we can see you. Nurul, you're still around.
Yeah, I was trying to connect.
It looked like you had fallen asleep suddenly, but
Very
in
far
fact,
out
I
in
guess
Bangladesh.
you're.
If you, I can finish my proposition that I was formulating. May I?
Yes, of course you may. And then you get the last word, because we were about to end it when you came back, so you came back at a good time.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry personally and on behalf of my government.
Well, it was probably your government who made the line drop, I know that. Anyway, go ahead.
The point that I was trying to make is the why, that as far as some of us understand that Washington has imposed sanctions on some allegedly errant officials of a particular law enforcement agencies, and it had started working. Why? Because the organization concerned was, as we saw, was not abusing the law the way they had been doing it earlier before the sanctions. Now, if what the government has said, or our Prime Minister has said, if she really means it, if there is nothing behind it beyond that, so she has clearly taken a position in this newly developed global geopolitical situation where India, China, Russia is on the one side, and the West, particularly the United States and UK and others are on the other. So we are in serious trouble to think that whether our government has divided the global forces only for the 7 boys, or she has some other things behind it. What Dr. Riaz has said, the geopolitical global issues. Bangladesh's people at large has no reason, being a small developing country, without having any major role in any regional or say global power struggle. We were trying to develop our own self. Why should we be the party to that, this or that serious gaps? Now, question is that the gentleman has asked the geopolitical issues that our incumbents in Bangladesh have taken sides. I believe the people of Bangladesh haven't. And you cannot prove it until and unless there's genuine, participatory, inclusive elections are there. And the agenda of both the sides are fixed. As I say, as I understand, if there is a good elections, Bangladesh as a state might change their position. Because here, government, state, ruling party, prime minister are just mingled by the ruling party intellectual elite, which is a serious problem. So, but challenge of Bangladesh remains, even in terms of geopolitics, that whether a truly representative government is in power, whether they can take a course, even in the strains of conflicting geopolitical situations, take a course consistent with the public opinion. And I would like to finish by saying just one sentence. What we are worried as citizens and local journalists, that a negative voting can change power in Bangladesh. Whether the negative voting will eventually change into a positive one by way of the opposition camp presenting before the people a comprehensive program of democratic reforms. Thank you.
Well, that is a very interesting note to close on, Nurul, because first of all, you turn out to be the only journalist I know who has been disappeared and come back. We find that quite amazing, actually. Very rare. But let me say that, you know, it's an optimistic thought, and it's a nice one to end on. But it's worrisome too, because this whole question of sanctions has obviously inspired your prime minister to start joining the other side and taking pot shots at the West, certainly the United States recently, as, you know, trying to do regime change and all those other things, and which is not true, I'm quite sure of that. And so I wonder if we aren't coming to we're coming to a real crunch point, and I don't know, I'm interested, I'll be interested in hearing later, because we can't go any longer, but hearing later how you think it'll go. So we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, it is time to call it quits, and that's what we're doing right now. But I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope we'll see you again at our next event.